All right, everyone, I think we'll go ahead and get started so we're not keeping you away from your evenings. My name is Susan Kruse. I am the Executive Director of the Community Climate Collaborative. Again, just a little housekeeping to share. First of all, we are recording this session, so just want to make you all aware of that. We have a high number of participants, so we're going to keep everyone on mute. If you would like to ask a question, which we will have to absolutely have times for questions at the end, please put it in the chat. And Terry Kent, our Director of Programs and Communications, will be able to help us stay organized and get to the questions as we need to. So welcome to this webinar on uncovering energy inequity in Charlottesville. I just want to take a moment to thank the funders who have made this work possible, the Audubon's Foundation, the Energy Foundation, and the Patagonia Foundation. I'd also like to thank C3, so we're Community Climate Collaborative, also known as C3, to thank our board of directors and our incredible staff for all their support on this project. So for this presentation, we're going to give you a little overview of where we started, define the problem of energy burden and energy inequity in Charlottesville. We're going to look at where it's occurring and the intensity of it, and we're going to uncover how our research allowed us to uncover the inequity that exists. And we're going to discuss solutions and how we can all work together to build a response to this problem for our community. So C3 really started looking into energy inequity early last year, and we really wanted to understand how energy consumption varied among different households in our community, both in terms of consumption levels, but also types of energy consumed. Our first policy around this issue was developed last summer alongside the local Energy Alliance program. And it was a policy to assist housing choice voucher recipients and landlords both, which enabled energy efficiency and investments in properties that were housing choice voucher recipients, and to help lower the energy bills and incentivize landlords to accept these vouchers. Around the fall of 2019, we attended the Southwood Trailer Parks Back to School Festival, where we conducted a very informal survey of residents. And you'll see that survey on the right. And we were asking residents how much they pay in energy costs each month. And while we put an artificial ceiling on the survey of $500, assuming that energy bills would never be that high for individual trailers, we found that residents were paying $300 and some more than $500 a month in energy costs and electricity costs alone. So we knew this problem was likely not just isolated to Southwood, but that there were probably pockets of inequity throughout our community. And so this spring really began writing this report in earnest, which we're very excited to present to you today. But before we begin, I want to define some terms so we're all on the same page. Energy equity, what is energy burden, and when do we consider energy burden to be extremely or very high? Energy equity is a context in which all households have access to clean, affordable, and secure energy services in an equitable manner. And by equitable manner, we mean considering different needs and demographic characteristics such as ethnicity, income, race, geographic location, and all as a part of their housing situations. Energy burden refers to the portion of a household income that is spent on energy costs, including electricity, natural gas, propane, and other energy sources. You can determine your own energy burden by estimating how much you pay in a year, looking at your monthly bills and dividing that into your income to get the percentage of your income that you are paying on energy costs. It is considered to be an unsustainable energy burden if you are paying more than 6% of your income on energy costs. So now that we know what energy burden is, the difference is, what are the different levels of intensity of that energy burden? It is considered to be a high energy burden if it's between 6 and 10%. A very high burden is between 10 and 20%. And an extremely high burden is households who are paying 20% or more of their monthly income on energy costs. Under these definitions, Charlottesville does not have an energy burden issue on average. Our average energy burden in Charlottesville is 2.3%. And that is considered moderate and not necessarily alarming. And many studies could have stopped here and said, well, Charlottesville doesn't really have an energy problem. Let's look at other issues. But C3 wanted to dig a little deeper. Charlottesville has 12 census tracts, and this is the next level, the main level of our analysis. And those census tracts are various neighborhoods in our city that made up for them, and we made an approximation of which neighborhoods were covered by which census tracts. And you can see here the average energy burden now broken out per census tract. And Charlottesville's total average burden on the far right of 2.3. And you can see some census tracts are starting to break out of the average and show characteristics of having higher energy burden. Some neighborhoods, census tracts reporting energy burden levels 2.5 times the levels of other neighborhoods. But still, even at this level of averages, you don't see an incredible energy burden in Charlottesville. Everybody seems to be under the 6%. So that's where I want to introduce you to Caetano de Campos Lopes, who is our Director of Climate Policy, and his work as the lead author on this report, and along with Christiana Ivanova. And he spent numerous hours really digging into this issue so that we could have the ability to look beyond the averages and see the pockets of energy inequity that exist in our community so we can understand how to address it. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Caetano.
Hey, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Can you hear me well? Yes? Okay. So we will now further explore the key findings of our energy equity report. And as Susan pointed out, by going beyond the average energy burden levels of Charlottesville or of its neighborhoods, our research was able to uncover alarming energy inequities in our community. Let's explore some of them. Okay, our first key finding was that nearly 5,000 households, or 27% of the city's population, face high energy burden levels. More than 4,000 households face very high energy burden levels, and almost 1,000 of them allocate 20% or more of their income to home energy expenditures. In other words, we were now capable of seeing that although overall Charlottesville has a quote-unquote mild average energy burden of only 2.3%, thousands of households in the city face energy burden levels that are more than 5 times that percentage. The impacts that it could have on equity and affordable housing are outrageous, and we needed to better understand where these households lived and what driven these elevated energy burden levels. Okay, by focusing on the share of each neighborhood's households that paid 10% or more of their income in energy costs, we begin to confirm our hypothesis that energy burden in Charlottesville was even more unevenly distributed than what the neighborhood averages have initially told us. For instance, although the city's average energy burden is it's mild, 2.3%, we can see here that 22% of the city's households, or nearly 1 in every 4, face an energy burden level of 10% or more. Moreover, more than half of the households living in the city's census tracts corresponding to 10th and Page neighborhood and part of Venable face energy burden levels of 10% or more. That's nearly 2.5 times the concentration in Charlottesville and 11 times the concentration in the Locust Grove neighborhood. All of that in a context where the average energy burden of Tampa Bay and Venable is a quote-unquote moderate 4%. So our analysis, another thing that our analysis shown actually, is how more impacted neighborhoods and census tracts seem to be unevenly distributed across the city. We can see here that they're close together. The four areas with highest concentration, they're close together and inside the orange dotted circle area of the map. Okay, before we continue, I would like to take a moment now to add some numbers to all of these percentages that we have been looking at so far. In terms of dollar amount, how much are we talking about when we say that a household pays a 6%, 10%, or 20% energy burden level? Here we can see in this table that given a certain energy burden percentage of income, a household's energy expenditure would vary depending on the income level of the household. For example, let's consider the case of a household that earns $23,340 per year, or right at 30% of the area median income for the year of 2016. And let's assume that this household faces an energy burden of 20%. So this hypothetical household would spend nearly $4,700 per year in home energy costs alone. And a side note here is that usually households earning 30% of AMI or less would be considered as extremely low income households. Okay, still considering the same hypothetical household. When we look at it on a monthly basis, this would represent a household with an income level of approximately $2,000 per month. Yes, an energy expenditure of $400 per month on home energy costs alone. That's a lot. And although these values are just for a hypothetical household, if we take a moment here to remember the results of our informal survey with Southwood's households, we can easily conceptualize how these can indeed be the reality faced by many of our community members. Okay, so now we know that energy burden levels can be very acute for some households in Charlottesville, despite the city's mild average. And we also have an idea of what that means in terms of dollars per month. But again, why does energy burden levels exist for some households and neighborhoods more than to others? To answer this question, we started by exploring the factors that studies across the United States identified as key drivers of energy burden. We also compared these factors with what local studies have considered to be drivers of unaffordable housing in Charlottesville. This literature review allows us to conclude that most drivers of energy burden are also drivers of unaffordable housing, and that they can be summarized as building features, education levels, home ownership, income levels, and race, with a special focus for income, home ownership, and race. Okay, a few moments ago, we just saw this map with the share of each neighborhood's households that paid 10% or more of their income in energy costs. In this slide, we use the same map to explore how the presence of very high energy burden levels overlaps with how certain demographic features are distributed across Charlottesville neighborhoods or census tracts. The blue dots that we can see here in function of their size show how for each neighborhood, the concentration of lower education levels, lower home ownership levels, and higher presence of populations of color. This visualization here allows us to see in a simple way how the presence of these demographic features seem to overlap, in fact, indeed, with the same neighborhoods that have previously been identified as those with major concentrations of households with high energy burden levels. All of these suggests that these demographic features are drivers of energy burden in Charlottesville. However, at C3, we wanted to go further and explore the actual relevance in the city of these usually accepted drivers of energy burden. After undergoing some further analysis, we were able to reach, among others, the following novelty findings. First, extremely low-income households face average energy burden of 16%, being these the highest energy burden levels of any income group. Second, given a same built year, renter-occupied homes face energy burden levels up to 2 times higher than those faced by homeowners. Another one, there is no clear link, according to our research, between the year built of housing units and energy burden levels in the city of Charlottesville. And the last one, but not the last one of our research, just the last one here. When controlling by income, homeownership does not seem to be a relevant driver of energy burden, actually. Okay, these sometimes unexpected or counterintuitive findings confirmed, from our perspective, the importance of this research, and showed that how general beliefs based on national or state level studies might not always be applicable to the specific realities of smaller yet unique communities such as Charlottesville. Okay, now that we have a better understanding of the importance of tackling energy burden, where energy burden levels are bigger and more concentrated, what are the relevant drivers of energy burden in Charlottesville, remains the question, what's next? And can we actually address energy burden in Charlottesville? Right. And first of all, the good news is that yes, solutions exist. In this report, we explored possible solutions to address the energy burden in Charlottesville and found that a targeted program that has energy equity as a first priority should be focused on extremely low-income households and widely deploy energy efficiency improvements, coupled with investments in distributed renewable energy generation. Okay, let's say that we implement programs like that. What outcomes could we expect from such programs? In a hypothetical case study, we have explored the socioeconomic and environmental impacts of reducing extreme energy burden from 24 to 6%. By focusing on extremely low-income households, our hypothetical program would, on average, free up to $1,300 approximately, 11,000 kilowatt hours, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 4.5 tons of CO2 equivalent per year for each household per year. Now, let's imagine that this program is scaled up to 1,000 households. This would translate to 11 million kilowatt hours per year and 4,500 tons of CO2 per year. And a quick note, 1,000 households is a feasible number if we remember that nearly 1,000 households in the city face an energy burden of 20% or more. So that's a possible reach for a program like this one. And another consequence would be that, in turn, these $1.3 million that these households would save could be used to improve their life qualities per year. And moreover, assuming that part of it would be spent locally instead of increasing the revenues of major energy utilities, this could further activate and revigorate the city's economy. Okay, let's put it this way. Besides reducing energy consumption and avoiding greenhouse gases emissions equivalent to hundreds of households, by investing in energy efficiency and renewable energy, a program similar to this one would also help create jobs and reactivate the economy in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. So in a nutshell, these are the key findings of our report. Thank you, Susan.
So thank you, Caetano. We're going to hear for a little bit more from Caetano in just a couple minutes, but first I want to introduce a couple of other people to you this evening. The first is Laura Goldblatt. I'm a big fan of her work with the Charlottesville Low Income Housing Coalition, and she also is a commissioner for the Charlottesville Redevelopment and Housing Authority and an assistant professor of English at the University of Virginia. Laura and our friends at CLIC, the Charlottesville Low Income Housing Coalition, spend a lot more time in these communities than C3 has to date, and understand the burdens that are faced by many of these community members and are having those important conversations. So I really wanted to make sure that you all got a chance to hear from Laura and how all this relates to affordable housing work in the city. So Laura.
Great, thanks so much, and thanks to C3 for including me and for thinking about CLIC and the CRHA when considering your findings. The Charlottesville Low Income Housing Coalition, CLIC, is an organization that seeks to stop and then eventually, we hope, roll back displacement in Charlottesville. So people who find themselves being pushed out of neighborhoods that they've historically lived in because of rising home costs or low wages or combination of the two. And CRHA, the Charlottesville Redevelopment and Housing Authority, runs the public housing and Section 8 housing program in the city and a lot of its related programs. So I do talk a lot to low income and very low income residents of Charlottesville very regularly. And what I found, what CLIC has found, is that when we talk to these residents, we find that they have a really strong preference to remain in their neighborhoods. And I don't think that that should necessarily surprise anyone, that they see themselves as a vibrant part of vibrant communities. They know their neighbors, they like their neighbors, their kids have people to play with, they know how to get to school and to work. And so they like the idea, they really want to remain in the neighborhoods that they've been living in, but they find themselves being pushed out of them. And so when we've been developing solutions for affordable housing, traditionally we've looked only at rent or at taxes and ways to appeal city rising tax assessment rates so that people are able, if they own their homes, to stay or that they can continue to rent in these neighborhoods. But this report, which is really thorough, it shows us that that's incomplete because it doesn't do us very much good to put people into affordable houses when we're just considering rent or taxes if they're not going to be able to afford the utilities because the utility bills are so high. So I see this as a way to a really crucial piece in considering the affordable housing landscape in Charlottesville, which right now many of you know is at a crisis point. Charlottesville has an affordable housing crisis. And according to Rich Schuyler, in a report that I believe he published in 2016, the city has lost over 12% of its African American community because they've been driven out because of high housing costs. So this is really a crisis, and being able to think about ways to reduce energy burden is a way to continue to have people in their neighborhoods. The other thing is that when Caetano talks about the amount of savings per household, that's really important income and really important money for a lot of the residents that I've been speaking to. It means that you can if you hold multiple jobs, which many people do, 2 or 3 jobs, you might be able to not have to have 2 or 3 jobs. You could be able to scale back on some of that work, and you would have more time to spend in leisure activities or with your family or in looking for new jobs or in education or training. It also means enrolling your kids in organized sports or music classes or all kinds of things that do have a cost associated with them and are really important parts of making Charlottesville vibrant. And then the last piece, as a commissioner, we've been really interested with CRHA in thinking about the Section 3 program, which is a part of the Fair Housing Act that says that priority should be given to public and Section 8 housing residents when doing any work in the city. But it's poorly implemented and it requires a lot of training. But it's really exciting to imagine that solar energy and other clean energy jobs could become a part of the jobs landscape in Charlottesville Charlottesville, and that we could provide vocational training to people in clean jobs. And so that's really exciting. And so when I think about Charlottesville and I hear people say what a great place to live it is, I think that it's a great place to live because of the people who have lived here for a long time and have made it a really diverse and thriving community. And so it's important to me to make sure that we maintain that diversity, and affordable housing and energy burden is now a really big part of figuring out how to do that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. I really appreciate you being here. I also want to introduce you to Javier Raudales. And Javier, I hope I am pronouncing your last name properly. Javier is the Client Services Coordinator for SIN Barreras, and they have worked with the Southwood communities and other immigrant and Latinx communities in Charlottesville. And I think some of the barriers those communities face in getting access to solutions to climate change and energy burden, that's really important to take into consideration. So we're grateful to have Javier with us this evening to speak about this issue. So Javier.
Yeah, I'm not going to make you roll the R. My name's Javier Raudales. I'll roll it. What I wanted, first, I'm thankful that I was asked to participate in this. One thing I want to stress is that these inequalities we see in the community that Sin Barrera faces, we're a local nonprofit that's focused on the immigrant community, especially the Spanish-speaking community. I would say that a good chunk of the community that comes in is probably undocumented or recently arrived, or English is their second language. A lot of the inequalities that we've faced before what we're going through right now have only just been more accentuated by the current situation. So I think that any solution that we have to addressing energy burden in our community has to be very aware of this unique community. In general, I've seen a concern for me is that there is options to find relief, not just energy burden, but general issues that are impacting the immigrant community. But there's questions about accessibility. The first step is material in Spanish. And then beyond that, it's addressing realities in the community. And aside to this, for example, you have to have a unique approach to this community if you want to do home ownership. You're really barred from doing, from building credit, for example, depending with what papers you have. Beyond that, it's just being very tailored to facilitate the community being able to have these ways that we're looking at to address this issue. From being somewhere that's welcoming, an environment that isn't culturally too different to what we experience in our communities. So it starts with the language, it starts with the material, but then it's also being very aware of what the community is, what barriers they have through identification, through not knowledge of how systems work here. They need people who will facilitate, especially if it's needs-based programs, to be able to navigate the paperwork. So I think that any solution in our local area, this community is addressed by the same issues of energy burden. People come in with their bills sometimes to figure out stuff. So I see the prices. This community is very resilient. But they need to be able to tap into these resources that they have in our community to address energy burden. And that'll make it easier for them to have home ownership or to have options in where they want to live and to live a more comfortable life. I don't think we talk enough about how important in our lives are the creature comforts. And if it gets hot in the summer or if it gets cold in the winter, if you're trying to put bills together, that's a real rough thing for our community. And it's only accentuated by the current times.
Thank you, Javier. And I know it sounds, definitely sounds like people are trying to reach you now. And I know that you have been very busy. So unfortunately, because of the communities you work with being particularly hard hit by this pandemic and economic crisis. So we're grateful that you are spending time this evening with us. Thank you so much. So before we get to questions, which I encourage you, if you've already got questions, feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat. Terry will be organizing those, and you can ask questions of Caetano, myself, Javier, or Laura. But I want to turn it back over to Caetano really quickly to just talk about what's next for C3 and what are we thinking about before we begin our dialogue together. So Caetano.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Javier, and thank you, Laura. It's really important for us to have you joining us today and giving your feedback. It's very enriching. So this report represents a beginning of our understanding of how energy inequity impacts our community and how cross-sectoral climate and affordable housing policies can help address it. Based on our findings and received community feedback that we're going to start to receive this week, in the next weeks and months, C3 looks forward to designing future research and subsequent policy recommendations and concerted policy advocacy efforts alongside Charlottesville's community stakeholders and residents and other organizations, obviously. Important questions, we must say that important questions still need to be addressed, such as better understanding energy-borne dynamics of particular neighborhoods or demographics, how neighborhoods with elevated concentration of UVA students and how neighborhoods with elevated concentration of UVA students contribute to this energy burden level that the city faces and certain neighborhoods face in the city. We believe that directing future research and outreach initiatives primarily to those households that we have pinpointed here, neighborhoods experiencing the most significant energy burdens, will give Charlottesville the ability to best address energy burden and affordable housing problems in our community. In a few words, it's clear that there is a lot of work to be done, and I believe that we all look forward to starting it right away.
Thank you, Caetano. And so just a few, so feel free to put your questions in the chat. We're going to open it up for questions. Before I do that, I just want to let you know that Terry's also going to put a link in the chat to the webpage on our site, theclimatecollaborative.org, where you can view the full report, an executive summary, an interactive map where you can choose which demographics you want to interact with energy burden to see where it's happening in our community. And I think Terry's also going to send you a feedback survey over the chat. So thank you all for being here, but let's hear from some of you. Terry, what have you got in terms of questions?
All right, well, thank you. So our first question is, how did C3 get the energy cost data, and was the demographic data from the census?
Caetano.
Okay. Both questions actually rely on the Census Bureau information, but actually the American Community Survey. Particularly the energy cost data, we have downloaded from the Department of Energy. They have a very, very interesting tool called the Low Income Energy Affordability Data tool. But this tool is based on information from the American Community Survey, which is conducted by the US Census Bureau. So ultimately, all the information that we have worked is mainly from the American Community Survey for the year of 2016. We have been consistent with accomplishing only estimations that use the information from the same year. All of the information we have used is for 2016, with the exception of some qualitative studies that we use to help us reach some conclusions, or for example, the affordable housing studies in Charlottesville, which use data from different years. But as far as energy and demographics charts and tables that we saw in this presentation and throughout the report, 2016.
Other questions, Terry?
Oh, here we go. From Brandy, we've got, one of the suggestions for what could be done about this is money for improvements to energy efficiency of homes. If these improvements were made to rental housing, what would prevent landlords from raising the rent as a result, and therefore possibly displacing residents? Good question.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's, and Caetano, feel free to jump in, that's one of the things we really want to explore alongside the communities who are feeling the impacts of energy burden. I think gentrification and displacement is a real issue in Charlottesville, and we want to make sure that the policies we're enacting are not going to cause further stress on communities. At the same time, we want to alleviate some of the burdens that folks are experiencing. So we're not quite sure the answer to that question, because what we want to do is design the programs alongside these community members so that we can do our best to avoid displacement that has happened in other places with housing improvement programs. But generally speaking, very generally speaking, energy efficiency does not drive up home prices as much as some other things do, but it's still something we want to keep an eye on and make sure we're not adding to problems.
Other questions? I don't see some in the chat as of yet. And all of you all are muted, and so you'll have to send us a chat if you'd like to verbally ask your question. Ooh, somebody showed some eco action. So Dan asks, let's go to Marcia's questions first. Will you be presenting solutions today? What can you get more specific on solutions?
So Caetano and I can probably help to answer this question, but we have been researching different financing mechanisms across the country to see what is working in some places and what might be applicable to Charlottesville. So we don't necessarily have the answers right now. And again, we want to make sure we're designing solutions alongside community members. What we do know is that there is going to need to be a significant investment in affordable housing, particularly for energy efficiency improvements for highly energy burdened households. And so we want to make sure we're advocating for a lot of resources for energy efficiency improvements for high energy burdens. What shape that looks like and how it gets deployed is still undetermined, because we want to make sure we're designing it alongside the community. But Caetano, feel free to add on to that.
Yeah, I would first of all, Susan, I mostly agree, or 100% agree with everything that you said so far. But I would just jump in a little bit, because it seems that more than one person is asking pretty much quote unquote the same question. And I would like to say the following. We can see examples of municipalities that have implemented policies that have been successful in reducing energy burdens by advancing access to solar energy or increasing energy efficiency of low-income households or other targeted households. However, we do not want to take to make the assumption that necessarily what worked elsewhere will 100% work here, right? We can see these examples and be inspired by them. That's what the report made so far. It compiled, besides focusing on all the aspect of uncovering energy inequity, because that was the key part of the report, but we also compiled a number of possible solutions. But the only thing that's going to make this solution successful here is not the fact that they were successful elsewhere, is the buying and the desire of community members that we want to benefit by the solution actually wanting to participate in the solution. And how are we going to prevent displacement and etc. is, in my understanding, by not being lightheaded, or I don't know if this is the right expression, but by not being, by taking this very cautiously, trying to think thoroughly if the community members are willing to engage with this program, and trying to think what mechanisms the program will actually implement to ensure that after a period of time, these beneficiaries are not going to, I don't know, be displaced. So it's not going to be a solution that's going to be relevant for them just for a number of years, and then after that, that's it. They're going to be displaced because of X, Y reasons. So we're going to have to be careful, and we are looking forward. I think that's the best way to move forward, to try to elaborate, design the solution by talking a lot with the organizations that so far have been the ones most closely to these neighbors and to these populations. And that's where we are right now, and that's why today we didn't want to bring solutions. We wanted to bring a conversation and start creating an environment of collaboration. And that's why we are so glad that we have Javier and Laura here, and we look forward to learn more from them.
Okay, so next question comes from Katrina. What are you doing specifically with community and environmental rights? And I can answer that from Director of Programs, but I'm gonna let you guys.
No, Terry, sounds like you have some thoughts there, so go ahead.
Well, currently we're working with residents and businesses and nonprofits in the community. So we have on the call Claire Habel. She works with our businesses. Our entry-level program for those folks is called the Better Business Challenge. And so that is scorecard-based, where we work very closely with these businesses on a number of initiatives, whether it's energy, water, waste. We've got a scorecard system, and they have a certain number of months to implement those actions and gain points, and then hopefully recognition. We have a big event once a year where we recognize those businesses. Now, in terms of environmental rights, I'll let Susan take that, but definitely this work and equity as a whole is a key piece of what we aim to do at C3 and through cross collaborations of this kind. So this is very exciting for us.
Yeah, I mean, largely in our work, we are trying to help folks navigate systems that can be overwhelming or confusing in terms of getting climate policy implemented. And we're really working to help our local governments better understand what's happening with climate and the impacts it's having on our community so that we can begin to address it. And so, we are very close partners with the Southern Environmental Law Center, who work on a lot of legal fronts. And so we rely on those partners to, assist with issues of rights, enforcing environmental laws. And we're more on the policy and community engagement front of climate.
Sounds good. Now we have one of our participants, Dan. I'm going to unmute him right now. He has an interesting program that he knows about up in Alexandria. So let me just unmute him for a moment. Dan, are you unmuted now?
I think, can you hear me?
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, my name is Dan Sklam, professor at George Mason University. And Arlington and Alexandria have worked together, and it's recently spread to Fairfax County, a program called Energy Masters, where basically we train, shouldn't say we personally, the people who I'm big fans of, train members of the community to assess and do energy and water efficiency upgrades in the community. And they go around to affordable housing complexes and support those upgrades. it's kind of like a Habitat for Humanity for the utilities, if you want. And it's been a very effective program in conjunction with the Arlington and Alexandria governments. There's been some effort to extend it into Fairfax. So I'm just thought I'd share that with you all. They're tweeting about a new virtual training for it right now. So given that virtual extends at least downstate, we'd be happy to see y'all involved if it seems appropriate for anyone who's on the line.
Wonderful. It's great to hear innovations that are happening. I know that around climate goal setting and sort of implementing solutions, Arlington and some of the Northern Virginia localities have been doing a fantastic job. I mean, we all need to do more, but and faster, but really inspired by our neighbors to the north and some of the work they're doing.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Can I take the opportunity that we are waiting for a follow-up question? Just want to say something on the environmental rights question of Katrina. I am not 100% sure. I can see that she combined community and environmental rights in the same question, so I'm not 100% sure if she was what she had in mind, like from a perspective of the natural rights of the nature of, or if she was talking about environmental justice. I will consider that she was talking about environmental justice, but Katrina, please correct me. And if you were talking about environmental justice, I think that energy equity is at least overlapping, if not a subsection, sort of saying, of the concept of climate justice. As we all know, climate justice is a part of the environmental justice as a whole. And why is that so? And why tackling energy inequity is right? It's precisely promoting environmental justice, because these neighbors, that face the highest energy bills as a percentage of their income, and that in the future, as temperature goes up, are going to be even more stressed by this energy expenditure as a percentage of their income, because they're going to be spending more income, spending more money, spending more resources to keep their ACs running, to keep them comfortable in all of these potential heat waves situations, and etc. And we also know that, coincidentally, most of these neighbors that face high energy burden levels also live in areas with lower presence of trees. And so when you combine all of that together, and the lower presence of trees contributing to a exacerbated heat sensation during heat waves, the reality is that these populations are going to be extremely harmed by these rising temperatures as a consequence of climate change. But these populations were the least contributors to climate change. And when I'm saying that with a lot of certainty, most of the studies so far about carbon footprint and talking about greenhouse gases emissions say that there is a very, very high correlation between income and how much a household emit in terms of greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide equivalent, and etc. So the reality is that since they're low-income population, they contributed the least probably in their family history, and they're going to be the ones suffering the most as a percentage of their income. So this is a component of climate justice. This is a component of environmental justice, and that's why we also think that energy equity is such an important topic, besides all the benefits of affordable housing and social justice and etc.
Thanks, Kai.
So thank you, Caetano. If there are no more, are there any more questions?
Let's see. Dan asked, did you do any studies of UVA students' household energy burden? So I know earlier in our webinar, the issue of UVA students did come up. And so if you'd like guys like to touch on that.
Yeah, I mean, there are UVA students who live in our community. They're part of these census tracts. They tend to have lower incomes or no incomes. And so They are part of our communities. They also are concentrated in places where we have historic populations of color and historic lower income community members. So they're very much integrated into the census tracts that have high energy burdens. And so we would love to partner with the University of Virginia to do surveys of students in off-campus housing to really understand what is happening with energy burden there, so that we can get a better handle on what is happening in some of these census tracts. So I think that points to opportunity for future collaboration with the university, just as we're looking to collaborate with Barreras and CLIC and other organizations who are engaged in the communities where this burden is happening.
Great. We don't have any more new questions. Katrina did clarify that she was speaking about the rights of nature. And I do have a couple friends that are involved in that movement, but I'm not as familiar as maybe I should be, but did want to clarify.
Yes, so, and I'm somewhat familiar with it. It's assigning certain rights to nature for waterways, and so that you cannot harm those things just endlessly, as we tend to do as a society. And so there's a push to recognize the rights of nature, I should say, so that we all take our resources and the world around us a little more seriously. I think that's somewhat out of scope for C3's work for the moment. That doesn't mean it wouldn't necessarily enter our scope some point in the future, but right now we're really focused on sort of our, the environment and the emissions that we're creating as a community. So, but I certainly I have tremendous respect for that work.
All right, any more questions?
All right, so thank you all. It looks like that is it. So thank you so much for spending your evening with the Community Climate Collaborative. Again, many thanks to Caetano for your incredible research, to Terry for helping to facilitate all of this. The whole C3 team has really put themselves into this presentation, this report, and we're really great. I'm just really grateful as the executive director of the organization to work with these fine folks. Thank you to Laura and Javier for being with us. I look forward to future partnerships with you both. And a reminder that you can view the report, the interactive map, and more information on our website at theclimatecollaborative.org. And I think Terry has sent you the link. And would be very grateful if you would take a couple minutes to fill out our survey at the end. So thank you all very much. Appreciate you being here.